Welcome to the Corner Office, where we bring you the latest news from the world of commercial real estate, the greatest voices in the industry, and the corporate chats you've been missing. Let's get to it.
Welcome back to the Corner Office podcast. We've got Wayde Carroll joining us from Cape Town. Wayde, welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you.
Thank you, Simon. Good to be here.
Just a little bit of information for our viewers. Obviously, Wade's joined us about a year ago. He's heading up our automotive division in our advisory section. Wayde, tell us a little bit more about yourself. What have you been up to, obviously, prior to you joining Galetti, and what's happened since you've joined?
Proud to say I'm a born and bred Vali. So my infant years started in Joburg. You wouldn't believe it. Down south in Alberton, of all places.
I thought you were a Cape Town boy through and through, hey?
Very early on, my folks moved down to Cape Town, thankfully so. Grew up in the Cape, schooled in the Cape, went to UCT, finished off my BCom in finance and economics, then did a postgrad in marketing, had a stint at a few of the ad agencies in Cape Town, wasn't really my thing, and then hopped up to the big smoke, which I think a lot of us Cape Townians sort of coined or termed it our early or young graduate military service up in Joburg, as one does, where the opportunities were. And I kind of got into transaction advisory stuff at a fund manager in Melrose Arch, RH Managers. We managed a private healthcare fund, and that fund was subsequently listed on the JSE. I then jumped at the opportunity to come back to the Cape. It was about the right time, fortunately so, and I started at Leaf Capital, the asset manager, and that's where I kind of got my teeth into the automotive asset class, so to speak. The fund was quite diverse. We had retail, industrial, as well as commercial, and on a retail front, I had a couple of motor dealerships, as well as panel beaters, fitment centers, and that's kind of where my sort of scope around that particular asset class came sort of forward. Right. And yeah, that was a good 4 or 5 year stint with Leaf, and yeah, happy to be on board here in Galetti since January.
No, brilliant. And I think certainly from our side, we've seen a huge demand for the sector. I think it's a growing sector in South Africa. Well, we'll touch on it in a couple of questions, but I think it's an interesting one where the landscape is certainly changing, and certainly an advisory kind of role in real estate is certainly very much needed by the investors, the landlords, and the occupiers. I think everyone's quite keen to understand, where we are in the automotive industry. South Africa's got a rich automotive history, but it's evolving rapidly, as I said. Can you give us a bit of an overview of the current landscape, the automotive landscape, where the sector's different? You mentioned slightly, there's obviously panel beating, there's showrooms, there's all sorts of things. But as a high level, can you give us a bit of a run through?
I think what's important to be mindful of, Simon, I don't need to go into detail about what the economy and the country has been through over the last sort of 3 to 4 years. Yes, COVID happened, interest rates. If one just takes a little bit of a step back, specifically in the automotive industry, but it kind of applies across the board as well. I've sort of come up with 3 pillars that I believe the automotive industry needs to sort of keep intact, almost the pillars that are going to keep this building sort of alive, and it's the 3 C's really. It's collaboration, convenience, and being conscious, or having a consciousness around the ever evolving sort of arena around environmental sustainability. And the new generation of buyers out there in the automotive market, what their needs are, what's giving them the sort of go ahead to want to remain driving a vehicle or not, and that for me is the crux of it. Yes, we'll dig into sort of the real estate aspects of it, but I think if one is to take the trends, the thinking, what is the flavor of the month? The 3 C's for me: collaboration, convenience, and consciousness. And I think if one has to sort of go back to those various sectors I mentioned, if one thinks of, yes, there's always going to be a need for a big box retail site still, that is still pretty much here to stay. If I just touch on the collaboration side of it, if one wants to downsize their footprint, so to speak, if you look at what Mercedes-Benz are doing, they've taken on quite an interesting step in that, in the Western Cape, for instance, two of their dealerships, well, they had four and they've now become two. So there's been a merge, of sort of the localities and around where they see the convenience for people to still access their product. And the overflow of cars that used to be sitting in a warehouse elsewhere, paying big rentals on those types of things, security, insurance, they've now collaborated with some of their accident repair centers or panel beaters, who are they're officially accredited, badged Mercedes-Benz repair centers.
Right.
And a lot of these guys are taking some of their overflow fleet and they're sort of being stored at the accident repair centers. Those guys still to this day need big warehouse space to house vehicles that need to be assessed or repaired, waiting to be collected. So there's been an interesting collaboration on that front. And then sort of on the convenience side, again, Mercedes-Benz leading the four here, they are looking at almost piggybacking on retail locations in high-end retail and residential areas like the waterfront, for instance, which is an example that is in the pipeline. We heard Graham Stanley, the CEO for Supergroup, saying that there is going to be a concept store at the V&A in Cape Town, whereby smaller store in a sort of vibrant hub, high-end.
It's more of an experience store, right? So it's kind of look and feel, but it's very high level and plush. And does the digital side of it also works towards that? All of these guys are becoming more digital. It's kind of leading more towards having a sort of a flagship store, doing a lot of the stuff online as well, and kind of driving it that way.
Yeah, I mean, that you make a good point there. I think if you look at the pillars, I mean, the glue that's holding it together is the tech side of it, right?
Yeah.
And the key there being, how do we integrate that? Again, collaborating with tech providers. South Africa does take a lot of our sort of cues from tech companies around the world, but we are definitely sort of the infrastructure and the expertise and our bandwidth capabilities are all there. We do have sort of tech hubs, tech cities, that are sort of springing up all around the country. So there's definitely again, it's a convenience aspect to that. When you want to merge with the tech, the infrastructure is there, which does assist.
So talking about tech and advancements and things, so obviously the world's talking about autonomous vehicles, things like that. How is South Africa positioning itself in terms of real estate for testing, deploying this type of technology? I mean, is this something we're even looking at this stage? Is it too soon for South Africa? I mean, obviously, I think the States are leading the way, and certainly Europe. But what's the thinking on SA? I mean, is this still 10 years away? Where are we at?
I think one needs to sort of double back a little bit, and I think where I've got to give our government some credit. I mean, we don't often sing from the hills about our government of the day, but something that's been quite significant, certainly in the local landscape, is the Department of Trade and Industry have come up with very sort of, I would say, significant economic ideas and incentives around building certain industrial development zones, the IDZ zones, and then your special economic zones, your SEZs. The one on the industrial side, it's more to facilitate trade between us and our neighboring countries, and the SEZ side is more industry specific. So on that, what we've actually seen happen in Tshwane, in Pretoria, there's actually the Tshwane Automotive Special Economic Zone. And what's been quite significant around that, and again, this particular sort of initiative merges those three pillars together quite significantly, in that the reason why the site was identified, it had to ensure that they were able to offer jobs to people in that area, so that conscience of ensuring the job creation sort of part of it. And the Ford Motor Group has actually taken a substantial footprint of the GMA in that zone.
So I mean, and we, as you said, we're certainly seeing this. Obviously, Ford is massive in Tshwane, and there's opportunities in PE and Toyota and SEZ in Durban, or is that not? Because obviously a huge facility and huge location there.
I think Toyota, if I'm not mistaken, is Port Elizabeth. The other significant ones are the BMW plant in Roslyn in Pretoria, and
Right.
significantly there, this year alone, they actually celebrated 50 years of that facility. And,
Wow.
and significantly what BMW have done, they've deployed significant investment into a electric facility and digitizing the facility to build the X3 that
wow.
will become an
Okay.
electric hybrid, and we will actually be exporting that around the world. So there is definitely sort of scope in South Africa for these types of facilities.
Yeah.
I mean, those big motor groups wouldn't be investing into our country if they didn't believe that there was going to be traction and obviously value add and return.
So now, obviously, I think when everyone thinks about automotive industry, real estate, they're thinking about these manufacturing plants. They're thinking about all of this. Now what else around the country? Obviously, I'm keen to jump into dealerships and to understand, what are the real sort of, when you're talking automotive assets, what are we looking at specifically? Yes, they're factories, warehouses. You can certainly get some sort of retail type of scenarios for panel shops and things like that. How are we seeing dealerships in South Africa? What's the current status of dealerships? We certainly see a lot on the market, a lot vacant. You drive around Joburg, you're going to see a number of vacant dealerships. What's the reasoning behind that? And where are the opportunities there?
I think what we have certainly found is a lot of, and from my time when I was at Leaf, a lot of the occupiers that did not end up renewing with us, the main reason was they had bought land and were developing their own sites. And
Okay.
I think that sort of move, I mean, yes, it was the Motus group. So, I mean, Motus are the biggest motor group in the world, so to speak. So they certainly have balance sheet and scope to do that. But ultimately, it's as a result of them wanting to almost control their own destiny and ensuring, that they are lining up the way in which hopefully the economy in South Africa will uptick at some point, but certainly ensuring that the type of development or research and development they're putting into their sites, they are ahead of the curve with regards to ensuring charges at their dealerships. That's something that we ourselves had at Leaf. Nissan themselves did have a charging facility, but it was minimal. But at their new site where they've moved from the one they had in mainland to where they've now moved, I think they've got something like 8. And Nissan have been quite sort of forward thinking in that regard. I think it was the Joule electric car that they actually came up with not too long ago. That's one aspect. And on the charging side of things, Simon, that's where the convenience now also comes in for those motorists wanting to go that route. I think Zenprop, if I'm not mistaken, have just put in the Thorpe Motor Group at Table Bay Mall, which is an interesting sort of theme that's starting to come through. Again, I bring my car to the mall. I mean, we all know it's convenient to have our car washed there, but now we want to charge our car, and that's what these sort of landlords, and I've got to take my hat off to Zenprop for doing that. That's certainly a move in the right direction, with regards to
increasing the attractiveness of the mall, of the location. So, I mean, this kind of leads into the next question, this mobility as a service, things like, this tech platforms like Uber and things like that. How is that affecting? Are we seeing a drop in sales on motor vehicles? Are we not? I mean, has that affected, that really has become more prevalent in the last 5 years. Do we see it affecting the industry, or do people just want to kind of drive their own cars?
The aspect around mobility as a service, before we sort of touch on the tech side of it, we've got to understand what has led to that. What are the enablers that have actually pointed to the fact that the generations of today are more prone to have a convenient ride at the tip of their fingers at a decent rate, with the least amount of hassles, right? I mean, on that, I think in South Africa, the amount of adults between the age of 20 and 25 with driver's license since 1980 has dropped by 20%. That gives you a very strong indication as to that particular population group around not wanting to own a motor vehicle, whether it's leased or bought. So that certainly has been something that guys have watched closely. But as in the dealerships and manufacturers, I think what needs to happen is you've got you will always have a fleet of cars in any sort of manufacturing concern, right? And the way in which this sort of excess fleet, so to speak, the collaboration and partnering with these e-hailing services, that's the one leg of it. And then ensuring that you partnering with the tech provider, and then ultimately the manufacturer still needs to service those cars. So if you're capturing that sort of supply chain, that's a way for a lot of the manufacturers to ensure that they're not missing the boat there. There's by no means, yes, people won't be buying as many cars, but guys, let's flip that on its head and say, look at the fleet we have. The technology is out there. Let's collaborate with these guys and let's partner to service those vehicles, because again, that's going to lead into emissions in urban areas, right? We know that the United Nations, through their whole, I think it was the climate change conference, the COP26 or something like that, by 2040, the idea is that we have zero emission vehicles on the road. I mean, by that time, Simon, I mean, not to veer off, but a good asset class or retirement communities. I hope there's going to be a nice beer hole there for me to come and cheers to you in 2040.
Now listen, I'll be done by then, I think, huh?
so there are these things out there that guys have known for a long time. I think 2021 was when that conference happened, and I think I think in 10 years, they were saying they want all cars to be fully electric. That, yes, that's not mandatory, but this is the sort of thinking that's out there in the market now. So all of that, one needs to put it all on the table and really understand where we're going. And from a manufacturing point of view, I think if you touch on those points, this whole mobility as a service should not be seen as something that's a doomsday scenario for the industry.
And so moving forward, I mean, if I'm a landlord or I own 25 dealership sites, I mean, is there anything to be worried about? Is there anything that we're looking at for the future for trends in terms of how do we stay sort of relevant and constant? And how do we, obviously as a landlord with a portfolio, how do we make sure we lock in those tenants? And actually, is it very much obviously now location driven and destination driven?
Absolutely. So I think it's important for me to sort of highlight, actually, during my time at Leaf, we had it's about a 3,000 square meter dealership, and the tenant sort of gave notice that they weren't going to renew. We were obviously in a bit of a sticky situation, and we actually targeted a panel beater who we felt was the appropriate user for that space. Now, yes, one might think that the layout of a motor dealership can be suited to a panel beater, which in theory it can, because you would have a basement with your workshop, customers receiving on the top. But there are so many legislative issues or not necessarily legislative, but more council bylaws and zoning rights that you need to be mindful of. And I mean, that exercise that we did, I mean, we got it right in the end. But just the amount of time it took for the council to get that process going. And of course, you change your zoning, you got to pay contributions. A lot of the municipalities do work differently in the country. So whole repurposing sort of aspect is possible. But unfortunately, at the moment, on the one end, yes, the SEZs, the IDZs are groundbreaking, but at a local government level, that's one of the biggest challenges landlords will have. And I mean, look, having walked that road before, I think this division and Galetti Corporate Services, we are well positioned to advise as to how to go about that process. But it is lengthy, it's costly.
It is a process,
If you get ahead of it, you can find yourself in a position where you do not have a 3,000 square meter vacancy, which, as we know, is not something you necessarily want to have to contend with, right?
I mean, this leads us nicely into, obviously the services that Galetti can offer, Wayde, and obviously you talked highly about this, and it's a problem solving, it's a repurposing. What else in automotive can we offer, our occupier clients, our landlords, our investors?
I think on an occupier front, the yes, we've seen, and I mentioned in my article 2 weeks ago, I think it was, around the interest rate hikes we've had. But one must always remember, even if you go back 50 years in South Africa, wherever the interest rate has gone or the exchange rate has gone, the curve will always sort of reset itself, and as an occupier who we primarily represent, it's the perfect time to be able to look at their leases, understand where it is in their term, do a due diligence of however many dealerships they are leasing, whether it's 5 to 10 or more, and understand exactly where they are in the market with regards to the rate that they're paying. And obviously with our relationships we have with certain of those landlords, can we sit across the table and find a way to restructure those lease agreements to give the occupier the breathing room, I feel, for at least the next 2 to 3 years until the interest rates and things sort of reset. And again, not leaving the landlord out of pocket. He essentially would get, yes, an early termination or an early renewal, however you want to look at it. And we extend the lease so that essentially they're not out of pocket. Again, in my scenario where I was at Leaf, I would have happily looked at something like that. But the occupier just was hell-bent on leaving for whatever reason. But significantly, that's where I do believe we could play a pivotal role.
So how do we move this forward, Wayde? How would you want clients to reach out to you? What are the next steps?
Well, I think it all starts with a conversation, right? I think that we as Galetti are putting, this very podcast goes on platforms that people will see, will hear. It's starting that conversation. And the long and the short of it is everything we've touched on here today, Simon. Every single auto person, whether it be panel, rent a car, they are thinking about these things that we are discussing. How do we integrate technology as the glue into those 3 C's: collaboration, convenience, and the consciousness of environmental sustainability? The buyers out there today, understanding landlord pain, understanding occupier pain.
Yes.
We've started a conversation here, and the conversation I'm certainly having with people that we're trying to sort of generate business with, we are touching on those points. It's all about timing, and it is about getting through to the right person who needs to hear these pressure points. And that's essentially what I want to continue to do, and the traction we're getting at the moment is good.
Great, Wayde. Well, listen, thank you very much for your time. It's been amazing talking to you.